the big debate that's on the internet about the Panzer VI Tiger or Tiger. In German, as many have pointed out to me, since I'm not speaking German, I don't pronounce them very well, but I'll try my best. It seems to have no end. There are those who praise its power, and there are those who say it was a useless and overly expensive means. As always, the truth is not only in the middle, but also somewhere else. Because as always, understanding the context is the key to understanding the subject. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? In the context of military history, this question can be rephrased as, does the tactic come before the weapon, or does the weapon come before the tactic? The correct answer is the former. That is, before designing, testing any type of equipment, the army or whoever is in charge of the army issues it on request. We need an X weapon to achieve Y goal. These needs are closely related not only to how the army works, but how it wants to work. And they become part of a broader framework that is defined as doctrine. Defining the doctrine itself is very difficult, since it is a very, very broad concept. The doctrine provides us with a key to understanding, a way of interpreting all the military affairs of a certain army. And a piece of equipment, whatever it may be, must be read in this context. So what was the German doctrine regarding the use of tanks? Peter Ironborn, who you've already met in my video on the M4 Sherman, explains it to us. Go ahead, Peter.
Thanks, Vlad. Shoots history. Germany, until 1942, that is before politics got involved in the development of vehicles, had a well-defined system for the development of tanks. Waffenmatt had an inspector whose job was to write specifications of what was required, so they could discuss it with the people involved in the development of vehicles and then send them to the various companies in the military industry. The production of German equipment was managed by private individuals. These companies would then deliver their best projects, which of course had to meet the requirements I mentioned earlier, to the prosecutor's office, which would judge which piece of equipment was most suitable so that it could be purchased. Up until that point, as Vlad said, X was required to do Y with the following characteristics and a particular emphasis on balancing the vehicle. The Tiger was part of a program from 1938 that required the use of heavy breakthrough vehicles. Germany at the time believed that various types of tanks were needed. Panzer III as the main tank, supported by Panzer IV with a possible Panzer VI as a breakthrough tank, heavily armored, well armed, not necessarily mobile and not necessarily highly reliable because it wouldn't have to move much. The plan should have worked as follows. Use the heavy tanks to break through the line. The medium tanks exploit the gap to get behind enemy lines, while the heavy ones retreat for maintenance, resupply, and then to be definitively removed from the front, until the next need to break through the line. However, they were not conceived as true heavy tanks, more like long-range anti-tank casemates. And unfortunately, this, like in the Sherman video, is just a summary. Thank you very much, Vlad. Over to you.
Thank you, Peter. So we have seen what the role of a heavy tank is for the German army. A heavy tank must carry out a breakthrough operation at a very specific point, the so-called Schwerpunkt. Keeping this consideration in mind, let's see how the Tiger was developed. Every design is the result of compromises, holds true in every field, not just the military. There are desirable features in a piece of equipment that are emphasized at the expense of others. Also because you can't have everything. The design for a Der Bruchwagen breakthrough vehicle already existed at the end of the 30s. The vehicle was armed like a Panzer IV, that is, a short 75 mm, but definitely better armored. The requirement for this vehicle changes a few times, particularly after the Wehrmacht's experience in France, when they encountered tanks like the Char B1 or the English Matilda, more heavily armored than the others. So on May 26, 1941, a new directive was issued before the invasion of the Soviet Union for a heavy tank, well armored and especially well armed, for the role of an anti-tank vehicle. Two companies in particular respond to this requirement, Henschel and Porsche. In the end, the model from Elmshell was chosen and thus the famous Panzer VI Tiger was born. Small note according to Nicholas Moran, if you don't know him, he is an American military man but also a historian. He makes a very interesting note, namely that the use of the 88 on the Tiger was almost accidental. The Germans would have preferred the 75mm L70, the same one then mounted on the Panther, to understand us. but they were not able to immediately produce the weapon and, in particular, the ammunition. So the first turrets that were produced for the vehicle were equipped by adapting the already existing 88. Initially, the weapon was not chosen because it did not meet the penetration requirements that had been set for this tank or anti-tank. But after a redesign of the ammunition, it was deemed satisfactory. However, by now, the production of these turrets armed with the 88 mm had started, and it made no sense to change it, so the 88 remained. The tank had good tactical mobility, but required a lot of maintenance, which was anticipated by the Germans and was not a problem. If I plan a breakthrough, I transport my vehicles to that point. Perhaps with the help of other means, such as trains, I can perform maintenance. Being on the offensive, I can decide how and when to use them. After the breakthrough, one could stop, since the front had moved forward and the necessary maintenance could be performed again. This was the role of the heavy tank, and in this role it excelled. With the Tigers, 14 heavy tank battalions were formed, the Schwerer Panzerabteilung, of which 10 were independent, which were assigned and deployed according to needs. If there needed to be a breakthrough at point X, one or more heavy tank battalions were sent. In this role, the vehicle and the unit, that is the heavy battalion, were absolutely lethal. The vehicle, among other things, designed for tank combat, was absolutely excellent. The problems used as an argument by those who claimed that the vehicle was a waste began when the Tiger Pain vehicle was used for roles it was not intended for. The problems mainly were two, namely every problem of an attack that aims to break through enemy lines very quickly. It's that an enemy under the right conditions can use a counter-tactic that is as old as war itself. The Germans themselves used it 20 years earlier during the First World War, so they were very familiar with this method. And the Soviets, in the Second World War, were in an ideal position to be able to use this tactic, and that's what they did. I'm obviously talking about the defense in depth. The Battle of Kursk is a perfect example of this defense in depth. The depth of the Soviet lines, even up to 50 kilometers, allowed the attack to exhaust itself. The heavy German battalions were given objectives that were impossible to achieve. The Tigers, having to make long marches to execute this deep breakthrough, began to have problems, were gradually damaged by enemy action, and began to break down. The second problem was when the vehicle was used in defense. There were two ways to do it. The first was to keep the heavy battalion in reserve and use it, for example, for counterattacks. But counterattacking is very different from executing a planned attack. The means must be quickly moved from one point to another, and since the enemy was the one dictating when and where they often attacked, there was no time and way for the necessary maintenance. One solution was to scatter the means along a large stretch of front to use them almost like anti-tank bunkers. In this role they were very effective, but the offensive capability of the cohesive battalion was completely lost. To recap the fifths, this is the fundamental point of the video. And that's what I want you to understand to correctly interpret this medium. 1D, the Tiger was an extremely specialized vehicle. It should not be treated as a standard tank too. The Tiger sacrificed features like reliability in favor of other features like protection and, above all, firepower. This fact was a deliberate and considered choice. 3. When used in the manner intended by the doctrine and designers of the vehicle, it was absolutely lethal. When not used in such a way, it had several problems. Fourth and last point, not many were produced because there was no need to produce many. The Germans' main means were others, by deliberate choice. And, as already mentioned, I want to emphasize it again, the Tiger was an extremely specialized vehicle that filled a niche use. Well, I hope that with this video, Peter and I have managed to give you a bit of context. In the video about the M4 Sherman, for example, I received several comments comparing the Sherman to the Tiger. Is it correct to do so? I don't think so. Both vehicles, not just these, but any other vehicle, should be seen in its context. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and see you next time.